Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to do another round of horror and thriller reads as well as a stack of horror graphic novels. This is a bit of a catch-up on some of the backlist titles I've been enjoying lately. I have, as always, a good variety here. I say that basically every single video. So let's just get into the books. First, let's talk about the thriller book that I read, and that is The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. This follows a woman who, as a young girl, went to a summer camp. She was bunking with 3 other girls, and in the middle of the night, they went out and did not come back again. They disappeared and their bodies were never found. She is haunted by this disappearance, and as an adult, she works as an artist and continues to draw these girls and is just wondering, of course, what happened to them. You find out right at the beginning, and it's in the title of the book, so it's not a spoiler, that she actually lied about some of the events surrounding their disappearance. She didn't fully tell the truth to the camp counselors and the detectives that were looking for these girls, and so she feels partially responsible for what happened, but at the same time she really doesn't know the true cause of where the girls went and who or what caused their disappearance, if they're dead and so forth. And so basically now as an adult, she gets invited back to the summer camp. It's now reopening. And so she decides to go because she hopes it'll give her the answers that she's looking for, because she's really never been able to move on in her life. So that is the setup for this book, and I definitely think this book will particularly appeal to those of you that have gone to summer camps as children yourself. I was someone who never got to go to summer camp, so it wasn't part of the story that I really connected with, but despite that, I still really enjoyed this one. As you all know, I'm a big fan of Riley Sager's work, and I thought this one was solid. I've heard a lot of people say that they consider this one to be his weakest book, so I went in with kind of average expectations, and I'll say that my expectations were met, and I really ended up just enjoying the experience. I found this book to be very summery, so I would recommend reading it in the summer months if possible, just because, again, that camp setting and, you know, going outside and going on the lake and canoeing and all of those activities lend themselves very well to the summer season. And in terms of the plot, this book, like all of his other books, kept me guessing. There was a lot of red herrings, there was twists and turns, and I didn't know where it was going. I, in a way, was able to guess part of the ending, but mostly because I suspected absolutely everyone. But the actual end of the book, and if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about, the final twist and turn, I did not see coming, and I absolutely loved. So I highly recommend this book to anyone who, like myself, enjoys a really well-plotted thriller. It was very entertaining, but it really came together in a satisfying way. I think Riley Sager did a really good job depicting teenage girls. I found them to be very realistic. The one girl that went missing is a bit of a queen bee mean girl, and I definitely knew girls like her in high school, and I just found her character work to be very compelling because she felt very realistic. And she was definitely the reason I kept reading this book, because the story is told in 2 perspectives, one being the present day and flashbacks to when they were still at camp. And I just found her to be someone who I wanted to know. I thought she was fascinating, and she really held the story together for me and just kept me turning the pages to find out what happened. So if you can't tell, I definitely recommend this one. As I mentioned, Riley Sager is among my favorite thriller authors, and for a good reason. I'm happy to say that I'm caught up on reading all of his books and will continue to read whatever he puts out next. I also read a young adult horror novel, and that is Survive the Night by Danielle Vega, who of course is the same author who wrote the Merciless series. And while I enjoyed this one, I didn't love it quite as much as the first Merciless book, but that's one of my all-time favorite YA horror novels, so it's a hard one to beat. This book follows a girl who was sent off to addictions camp because her parents found her using drugs. She has now come back, and the group of friends that got her in trouble the first time around have stolen her away from the party she was supposed to be attending to go and party with them. And so she gets involved with drugs and alcohol, and they end up going to a second event called Survive the Night. And when they get there, they get high, and the girl believes that she sees the dead body of her friend, and they begin to panic. But of course, as I mentioned, they are high on drugs, and so we as the reader don't quite know how much to believe what we are seeing, because you get that unreliable narrator. I will say that the characters in this book are very unlikable, especially as an adult reader. I don't have a lot of tolerance for teenagers that are just underage drinking and getting into drugs, and they're just breaking all the rules and just being really annoying. So they're definitely not the kind of characters you will be rooting for, but I did think that they were very realistic in terms of teenagers. So I think the representation is good. They're just not necessarily the kind of teenagers that I would want my own kids to be hanging out with when they get to that age. So all that being said, I actually really enjoyed this one. I think people are going to be really mixed on the ending, and when you actually get to the horror component of it, I liked it. It was definitely gruesome, which I've come to expect from Danielle Vega, and it's definitely got a supernatural feel to it, but for whatever reason, this one really worked well for me. It definitely wasn't a perfect book, but I had a lot of fun reading it. I always find her books are perfect when I get into a slumpy mood, and I just flew through this one in a day or two and would definitely recommend it to those of you that like young adult horror. I do think you need to be okay reading the YA genre to enjoy this one. But if you're looking for something different, if you're already a fan of Danielle Vega, I recommend checking out this one. It was just a fun read and exactly what I wanted at the time. After that, I went on to read a bunch of horror graphic novels because I was just in the mood to kind of fly through some easy books. And the first one I picked up was No Longer Human by Junji Ito, which, if you don't know, is one of my favorite horror authors. I just love his original horror manga that he writes. This one, however, is quite different. This is actually his adaptation of a very well-known literary piece of fiction from Japan. I was not familiar with it otherwise, and honestly, I only picked it up because of his adaptation, because his name was on this book. And I was actually really disappointed, which pains me to say that because I wanted to love this book so badly. The artwork is still strong because, of course, it's Junji Ito and I really do like his work, but I really don't think that his artwork really added to the story because it's not really the weird, gruesome horror that I've come to expect from Junji Ito. Instead, this is more the story of a young man. It tells a story growing up, and he deals with a lot of sexual abuse. He's very depressed, and it follows him throughout his life, and it's kind of this literary piece of fiction, and it's basically just not the kind of story I would pick up if Junji Ito's name wasn't attached to it. And again, I like Junji Ito's artwork, but I really don't see why he adapted this one because it just really didn't seem to match up with the kinds of stories he normally tells. And so yeah, this one really left me disappointed, underwhelmed, and I can't really recommend it, which pains me to say that. I wouldn't pick it up. Even if you love Junji Ito, you'll probably be disappointed like I was. Moving on to another disappointment, I also read Hungry Ghosts by Anthony Bourdain, who of course is that famous chef. I was very excited when I heard about this book because I, of course, love horror, but the other thing I actually enjoy, which I don't talk about much on my channel, is the fact that I really enjoy reading and watching things about food. I'm not really a foodie because I eat really boring, normal North American food, and I'm not that good of a cook, but I call myself a wannabe foodie because I love to read about fancy food and watch all kinds of documentaries and reality TV shows about cooking. And so I was very excited to have my love of horror come together with my love of food. And I don't have, honestly, a lot of connection to Anthony Bourdain. He's not actually a chef that I follow very closely or did follow when he was alive. But this was an interesting book that kind of left me, once again, disappointed. So this book is framed as a collection of short stories. There are a group of rich dinner guests that are basically each telling their story meant to scare the other guests. And all of the stories are supposed to involve food in one way or another. And I will say that a couple of stories had interesting moments. There definitely were some gruesome or creepy panels or scenes, but for the most part, the stories really left me wanting more. I found them to be a little bit predictable or just forgettable at times, and I really didn't love any of them, especially with a short story collection. I don't expect to love every story, but I don't think there was any stories I really particularly enjoyed, which is so disappointing. I thought the setup for the story was good, but I think that while I like reading books about food, I like reading books about delicious food. And because it brought in those horror elements, it just was kind of stories about gross food and people eating gross things. And despite my love of body horror, it just didn't work for me. It definitely has some body horror moments in it, which I appreciated, but it wasn't enough to make me love this book, and it's not enough for me to recommend this one. So another disappointment there. And finally, for graphic novels, I read volume 2 of Outer Darkness by John Layman. And this is a sci-fi horror space opera that follows a group of people on a ship. And in this world, or this galaxy rather, there are exorcists because there are ghosts and people get possessed, and so in order to survive in the galaxy, they need to be prepared for these supernatural events. The second book actually is framed around a haunted house story because there is a haunted house that gets moved into space, and you get to find the history of that house, which involves fighting Nazis, specifically nuns fighting Nazis. So there was a lot of really cool, weird elements in this second volume, just like in the first one, and I really like the idea behind these volumes. I want to love this series so much because, you know, I love science fiction, I love horror, and I typically love when they come together. But I hate to admit this because it's kind of embarrassing, but honestly, I found the second book, just like the first book, to be kind of confusing, and I felt like I didn't really get what was going on. And so despite wanting to love this series so much, I don't think I'm going to continue on. I appreciate elements of it, but I found myself just reading the panels and being confused. And I'd love to know if other people have had that same experience with this graphic novel series, because again, it has all the elements I love. It should be a favorite of mine, but it ended up kind of being a miss, and I think I'm just gonna let it go and move on to other things that I'm enjoying and understanding a little bit better. So embarrassing to admit, but I always want to be honest with you guys. I'm not always the most intellectual reader, and sometimes things just go over my head. So that is it for this video. I hate to have so many negative reviews in a video, but sometimes it happens, and I'm just gonna keep it real with you guys. So to end on a positive note, please recommend me some horror graphic novels or manga that you really like, especially if they're underhyped. I would love some recommendations for books that I will enjoy more than these ones. The thriller book and the horror book, however, the full-length novels I did enjoy, so I would recommend them to whoever is interested in either of the books. So please let me know down below what you think of Riley Sager or Danielle Vega's books. Thank you as always for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new here. I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.